My name is Natalie Ward, and I'm 27 years old. And the night my mother called me worthless, something inside me didn't just break, it woke up. The kind of awakening that doesn't scream. It waits, quiet, patient, dangerous. Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't bleed on the outside, they carve something cold and calculating within you. And that night, under golden lights and fake smells, I realized I was no longer the daughter they thought they could humiliate. The dining hall looked like a page torn from a luxury magazine, crystal chandeliers shimmering above, soft classical music floating in the background, and 19 guests seated like royalty round the long polished table. Every detail was perfect, just the way my mother liked it. Appearances meant everything to her. Reputation was her oxygen. And tonight, she had gathered her audience carefully, because humiliation, to her, was best served publicly. I sat at the far end of the table, barely noticed, fingers wrapped around a glass of water I hadn't touched. My dress was simple, elegant, but nothing compared to the diamonds dripping from my mother's neck. She sat at the head of the table, glowing with attention, her voice smooth, confident, commanding. My older brother Daniel laughed loudly beside her, already halfway through his second glass of wine, soaking in the approval I had spent my entire life chasing. "Let's make a toast," my mother announced, lifting her glass with a smile so polished it could cut glass. The room fell silent instantly. All eyes turned to her. This was her moment. She always needed one. I felt my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't explain yet, like my body already knew what was coming before my mind could accept it. "To success," she began, her voice warm and theatrical. "To hard work, to legacy." She paused just long enough to let the weight of her words settle. Then her eyes shifted, slowly, deliberately, until they landed on me. And suddenly, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. My heart beat louder than the music. "And to my son, Daniel," she continued, her smile widening with pride, "who has proven himself worthy of carrying this family forward." Applause followed, instantly soft, approving, expected. Daniel smirked, raising his glass slightly. I forced a small smile, my fingers tightening round the glass in my hand. Then came the shift, the moment that changed everything. My mother tilted her head slightly, her expression softening, but not with kindness. No, this softness was sharper than anger. "And as for my daughter," she said, her tone almost amused now, like she was about to share a joke I didn't want to hear. She let out a quiet laugh. "Well, not every child turns out valuable." A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Others looked away. No one defended me. No one spoke. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, suffocating, humiliating. My throat went dry, my chest tightening as every pair of eyes either stared at me or avoided me completely. "Honestly," she added, taking a slow sip of her wine, "sometimes I wonder if she's even mine. No ambition, no results, just existing." Her words landed like stones, one after another, crushing whatever dignity I had left. In that moment, I could feel the heat rising to my face, but I refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Daniel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smirk. "Mom, you're being too kind," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. A few more laughs followed, and just like that, I wasn't a person anymore. I was entertainment. But what they didn't know, what none of them realized in that moment, was that the worthless daughter sitting quietly at the end of the table was the one person in that room holding a truth powerful enough to destroy everything they had built. I lowered my gaze, hiding the storm building behind my silence, because sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't weak. They're just waiting. I didn't respond, not a word. I just sat there, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. But inside, something had shifted permanently. The humiliation didn't crush me, it sharpened me. Because the truth was, I wasn't just existing. I had spent the last 2 years quietly fixing a mess my family didn't even know existed. A mess worth $3 million. And the cruelest part, the only reason it hadn't exploded yet was me. 2 years ago, my father's company started bleeding money. Not publicly, of course. On the surface, Everything looked perfect: profits, expansion, growth. But behind closed doors, numbers didn't lie. There were discrepancies, silent leaks, bad decisions disguised as bold strategies. I found them accidentally while helping with minor financial reports. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was a pattern. I tried to tell my mother once, just once. I remember standing in her office, documents in my hand, my voice shaking but determined. She didn't even look at the papers. She just looked at me, the same way she did tonight. Dismissive, uninterested. "Natalie, leave the important things to people who understand them," she had said coldly. That was the moment I stopped asking for permission. So I worked in silence, late nights, early mornings, cross-checking accounts, correcting projections, quietly redirecting funds before losses became disasters. No recognition, no credit, just quiet damage control. Even Daniel, who probably carried the future of the family title, had no idea his biggest deals were hanging by a thread I was holding together behind the scenes. Back in the dining hall, the laughter slowly faded, and the conversation shifted to business again. Deals, investments, expansion plans. My mother thrived in that space, speaking with confidence, selling an image of control she didn't actually have. I watched her carefully now, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as someone seeing the truth clearly for the first time. Then I heard it, a name mentioned casually across the table. One of the investors leaned forward, smiling. "We're excited about the transfer scheduled for tomorrow," he said. "3 million is a big step, but with your track record, we trust you." My mother nodded gracefully, raising her glass again like everything was perfectly aligned. My heart skipped. Tomorrow? 3 million. They had no idea that the only reason that money hadn't already disappeared was because I had been quietly rerouting risk, correcting errors, and covering their blind spots. And tonight, after everything that had just happened, something inside me made a decision, a cold, irreversible decision. I picked up my glass slowly, my reflection staring back at me through the water. For years, I had protected them, fixed their mistakes, absorbed their ignorance, all while being treated like I was nothing, worthless, invisible. But now, I realized something terrifyingly simple. If I stopped, even for one day, everything would fall apart. And for the first time in my life, I wondered what would happen if I let it. I looked up again, my expression calm, almost unreadable. The storm inside me had settled into something much more dangerous than anger, clarity. Because revenge doesn't always start with action. Sometimes it begins with a choice to do nothing at all. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of laughter that no longer reached my ears. I sat there, silent, watching them celebrate a future I knew was already cracking beneath their feet. Every compliment my mother received, every confident promise she made, it all sounded hollow now because I knew the truth. And for the first time, I wasn't going to save them from it. I wasn't going to stay up all night correcting their mistakes. I wasn't going to quietly hold everything together while they tore me apart in public. When I got home that night, I didn't cry, not a single tear. I walked straight to my laptop, turned it on, and stared at the system I had built over 2 exhausting years. Every safeguard, every hidden correction, every silent adjustment that had kept their empire standing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, just a moment. Then, slowly, I began removing them, one by one, not destroying anything, just stepping back, letting their decisions stand on their own, without me rewriting the outcome. It was terrifying how simple it was. A few undone entries, a few uncorrected projections, a few risks left exactly where they had placed them. The kind of risks that looked harmless until they weren't. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my heartbeat steady. This wasn't sabotage. This was truth, finally being allowed to surface. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No calls, no messages. The world hadn't ended overnight. Not yet. I made myself coffee, sat by the window, and waited, because I knew how these things worked. Collapse doesn't always happen in an explosion. Sometimes it begins with a single crack, spreading quietly beneath the surface until everything gives way at once. By noon, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I watched his name flash on the screen for a few seconds before answering. His voice wasn't confident anymore. It was sharp, panicked. Natalie, did you touch anything in the system? He asked, trying to sound controlled. But failing, I took a slow sip of my coffee before replying. No, why? A pause, then a curse under his breath. Something's off. The numbers don't match. The transfer, there's a discrepancy. I could almost see it unfolding in real time. The confusion, the sudden realization that something was wrong, that the perfect image they had sold to their investors was starting to crack. I kept my voice calm. Maybe you should check it again, I said quietly. Or ask Mom. She understands everything, right? The silence on the other end of the call said more than any words could. An hour later, my mother called. Not with anger, not yet, with tension, the kind that hides panic beneath control. Natalie, she said, her voice tight, we're having a small issue with the transaction. You've been assisting with minor reports before. Did you notice anything unusual? I almost smiled. Minor reports. That's what she called the work that had been saving them. I looked out the window, watching the calm streets below. No, I replied simply. I stopped looking into those things after you told me to leave important matters to people who understand them. My words were quiet, but they landed exactly where they needed to. There was a pause on the line, a long one. For the first time, she had nothing to say. By evening, the cracks had turned into fractures. Calls were being made, meetings were being rushed, investors were asking questions, and the $3 million they had so confidently spoken about the night before was now at risk of disappearing completely. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could feel it, the slow unraveling of everything they thought they controlled. And as I sat there, calm, untouched by the chaos for the first time in years, I realized something powerful. This wasn't just revenge. This was balance. This was reality correcting itself after years of being manipulated, ignored, and dismissed. They had built their empire illusion, and I had been the one keeping that illusion alive. Not anymore. By the next morning, the panic was no longer hidden, it was everywhere. My phone lit up with missed calls, messages stacking one after another, each more desperate than the last. Daniel had called 8 times. My mother, 5. Even my father, who rarely involved himself in anything emotional, had tried twice. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally answering. This time, there was no arrogance left in their voices. Only urgency, only fear. Where are you? My mother demanded the second I picked up, her composure cracking at the edges. I could hear noise in the background, voices, peepers shuffling, tension thick enough to cut through the line. At home, I replied calmly, almost too calmly. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. You need to come to the office. Now, the way she said it wasn't a request anymore. It was desperation trying to sound like authority. When I walked into the building, everything felt different. The same marble floors, the same glass walls, but the confidence was gone. Employees whispered in corners. Assistants rushed past with anxious expressions. The illusion of control had shattered overnight, and now everyone could feel it. As I stepped into the conference room, eyes turned to me, not with dismissal this time, but with something unfamiliar. Need. My mother stood at the head of the table, her face pale but composed. Daniel looked exhausted, his usual arrogance replaced with restless frustration, and the investors, the same ones who had applauded him the night before, sat in silence, watching carefully, waiting, judging. The room was heavy with expectation. But this time, I wasn't the joke. I was the variable they couldn't understand. There is a gap, Daniel said quickly, pulling up financial projections on the screen. His voice was tight, controlled, but his hands betrayed him, slightly shaking. 3 million. The numbers don't align, and the transfer won't go through without it. He looked at me directly now, no smirk, no superiority, just pressure. You worked on these reports before. Did we miss something? I took a slow step forward, my eyes scanning the screen not because I needed to, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of this moment. No, I said quietly. You didn't miss anything. The room fell even quieter. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something beneath my calm tone. Then what is it? She asked, her voice sharper now. I turned to face her fully, meeting her gaze without hesitation for the first time in my life. It's exactly what you built, I replied. Uncorrected, unadjusted, real. The words landed harder than any accusation. Daniel frowned, confusion turning into realization. My mother didn't speak, but I saw the flicker of understanding behind her eyes. The moment she realized this wasn't a mistake. For 2 years, I continued, my voice steady, controlled. I've been fixing these numbers, quietly, every risk you ignored, every bad decision disguised as confidence. I corrected it. I held it together. I let the silence stretch, letting every word sink in. But you told me to leave important things to people who understand them. A pause. So I did. The room shifted. You could feel it. The investors exchanged glances. The tension wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about truth, about the fragile image my family had built, now cracking in front of everyone who mattered. Daniel looked at my mother, waiting for her to respond. But for once, she had no script, no control. You're saying, one of the investors spoke carefully, leaning forward, that without your involvement, this company is exposed to a $3 million loss. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was undeniable. I didn't rush my answer. I didn't soften it either. I'm saying, I replied, meeting his eyes, that the only reason you didn't lose it already was me. And just like that, the truth stood in the middle of the room, undeniable, unprotected, and impossible to ignore. The room didn't explode into chaos. It collapsed into silence, the kind of silence that suffocates. Every investor sat frozen, recalculating everything they thought they knew. My mother's empire, her perfect image, was cracking right in front of them, not because of an external threat, but because of the one person she had publicly called worthless just hours ago. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, his confidence completely stripped away. And my mother, she just stood there, her lips slightly parted, searching for control that no longer existed. What do you want? One of the investors finally asked, his voice low, measured, but direct. It wasn't a question filled with curiosity. It was a negotiation. Because now they understood something very clearly. This wasn't about fixing numbers anymore. This was about power. I took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle before I spoke. I don't want anything, I said calmly. I just stopped giving what was never valued. My words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any demand ever could. My mother stepped forward then, her heels echoing sharply against the floor. Natalie, she said, her voice softer now, carefully controlled, almost unfamiliar. This is not the time for emotions. We can discuss personal matters later. Right now, the company needs you. The shift in her tone was almost unbelievable. No arrogance, no mockery, just need. Desperation dressed as diplomacy. For years, I had waited to hear even a fraction of that acknowledgement. And now that it was here, it felt empty. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't searching for approval. I wasn't hoping for kindness. I was simply seeing her for who she was, a woman who only valued people when she needed them. Last night, I said quietly, in front of 19 people, you called me worthless. The room tightened again. No one moved. No one interrupted. And today, I continued, my voice steady, but colder now. You're asking that same worthless daughter to save everything? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. Natalie, enough, he said, his tone strained. This isn't about pride. This is $3 million. I turned my gaze to him slowly. Exactly, I replied. Now you understand the value of what I was doing. His silence after that wasn't just frustration, it was realization. The kind that comes too late. I stepped back slightly, creating distance not just physically, but emotionally. Here's the truth, I said, addressing the entire room now. I can fix it. I know exactly where the gaps are, how to stabilize the projections, how to protect the transfer. A flicker of hope passed through their faces instantly. But I didn't stop there. But I won't do it for free anymore. Not emotionally, not professionally, not at the cost of my dignity. The investors leaned in. My mother's expression tightened again. But she didn't interrupt. She couldn't. If I step in, I continued, it will be as an equal. Full control over financial decisions, written authority, and public acknowledgement of my role. Every word was deliberate, measured, earned. No more silence, no more invisibility. The air in the room felt electric now. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger anymore. This was justice shaped by clarity. My mother hesitated, just for a second. But in that second, everything was decided. Because everyone in that room saw it, the truth she couldn't hide. She needed me. And slowly, almost painfully, she nodded. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't proud. But it was real. And for the first time in my life, it was enough. I gave a small nod in return, then turned toward the screen. Already analyzing, already rebuilding, but this time, on my terms. Not as the invisible daughter in the shadows, but as the one holding everything together in the light. Because sometimes, karma doesn't come with destruction. Sometimes it comes with exposure, with truth, with balance finally being restored. And as I stood there, no longer silent, no longer small, I realized something powerful. I was never worthless. I was just surrounded by people who couldn't see my value until losing it cost them everything.